Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. Hope you're having a great week out there. On Monday, I told you that I attended CPAC last week, and I'm going to briefly talk about it today because it ties into the broader episode. When we look, something has gone horribly wrong here in America. When we look at what's going on within our institutions, what's going on within the political parties, it's a disaster. And obviously the 2020 presidential election, the 2022 midterm elections, for Republicans, it was a huge disappointment. But there's a reason that they're failing. And this disappointment can't be understated. What really concerns me, particularly in the 2022 midterms, was how independents broke for Democrats. Let's face it. It is the independents that are the ones who usually decide elections, especially when we're talking about competitive districts. Historically, you see the minority party win the majority of independent votes, yet that didn't happen this time. The GOP underperformed bigly, and the independents, they broke for Democrats. I explained this in November, so I'm not going to harp on it now, but one of the biggest reasons that Republicans are having such difficulties in winning over new voters is that they've abandoned their constituency. They turn their backs on core Republican philosophies, the foundations of Republicanism. And when you do that, when you turn your back on the idea of limited government, when you turn your back on the idea of fiscal responsibility, this is the result. It's why so many believe the system is run by a uniparty. Because when you really dig deep, there's been very little daylight between Democrats and Republicans. Sure, we have some differences on some of the issues, but we continue to see the massive abuses of power within our institutions, and both parties routinely grant the institutions more and more power. Congress has done little to rein in these institutions, even though it's pretty clear that they have been politically weaponized for quite some time. If we look at the other cornerstone of republicanism, there too, they failed. Our national debt has exploded under both Republicans and Democrats. When you listen to Republicans, most don't even talk about the principles of limited government anymore. They don't even bring up the idea of fiscal responsibility anymore. And when a Republican does bring up these topics, they're attacked, not by Democrats, but by other Republicans. However, we are to blame as well. I'm talking about ordinary Americans, regardless of whatever your political affiliation is. We have to assume some of this responsibility. Look at the dismal state of our country. Do you believe that we don't have any culpability in this? We certainly do, and I'm going to explain it all. Before I do, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. If you find the show informative, please share it with your family and friends, and I want to hear what you think. I want you to write a review on Apple Podcasts, drop me an email, podcast@PASReport, and I have to say, there are some emails that I absolutely love. I got this gem the other day. Quote, I just love discovering narcissists desperate for attention offering up mindless fulminations about how Democrats control the media and your students are too stupid to appreciate your brilliance. And now you've come to my attention. I just spent 30 minutes I'll never get back reviewing your repetitious and empty-headed and cliched commentary. And I have only one question. How did a jerk like you end up in academia? Surely not because of your devotion to honest inquiry, end quote. I love those emails. Those are the best emails I get because they really do make me laugh. I mean, first of all, he spelled not wrong. He spelled it nit. But I'm just saying, I'm not trying to be mean there. Make sure you proofread your nasty emails when you send them to me. Also, you complain about taking 30 minutes that you'll never get back, yet you ended up taking the time to write an email to send it to me. I love these emails. In any event, if you have something to say, email podcast@PASreport.com. Getting into today's episode, so I did attend CPAC, and I'll tell you, the event was different than the previous 2 years. And I hate to break it to everyone out there. There's some that are trying to sugarcoat things. There was very little excitement. A lot of people, they were not happy. They were miserable. There's a lot of infighting, a lot of factions. And it was relatively quiet. There were a lot less attendees than I've seen over the last 2 years. And that should be a red flag to Republicans, to the leadership within the Republican Party, the conservative movement, because we have to either put out a message that's going to win people over and draw people in, or we could continue doing what we're doing and we could continue to lose. I mean, the choice is ours. But I didn't hear anything new at CPAC, and that's part of our problem. I heard a lot of the complaints, and listen, it's easy to complain. You're going to hear me complain about our agencies in a minute. But you need solutions. And the Republicans are not putting a roadmap of how they're going to improve the lives of the American people. I heard very little in the way of principles of limited government and fiscal responsibility. And unfortunately, there's too many who believe that somehow we keep doing what we're doing and we're magically going to win. Now, listen, I don't care about the politicians taking digs at each other. I don't personally like it, but that's the nature of the beast. That's the name of the game. And if you're not going to take the arrows that are shot your way, then don't get into the race. However, what does concern me is the way that ordinary Republican supporters are talking to each other, the fighting I'm seeing amongst ordinary Republican supporters. And guess what? You want to do that? You want to factionalize even more? You are not going to win. And there's some serious issues out there. Just look at the abuses within our institutions, because just about every single one of our God-given rights is being violated in one way or another. Our right to privacy no longer exists. It's non-existent. Programs that were developed to target international terrorist organizations, these programs have quickly morphed into domestic spying programs. You have the NSA capturing and monitoring Americans' electronic communications, the metadata through the PRISM program. You have John Brennan, James Clapper, both lying to Congress. They were both directly asked, was the government monitoring American citizens? They openly lied to Congress. They were never charged with perjury, and not a single person who authorized these programs was ever held accountable. 2013, you have the IRS admitting to targeting conservative groups. Lois Lerner, she deemed that these conservative and Tea Party groups are guilty of having the wrong political opinion. And what happened? Well, for her actions, Lois Lerner, she refused to answer questions. She pleaded the fifth, was found in contempt of Congress, which Steve Bannon may be going to jail for that. However, she was allowed to retire, collect her pension, never held accountable. We still don't know all the details about this program. In 2014, you have John Brennan, CIA, spying on sitting members of the United States Senate Intelligence Committee. Neither John Brennan nor anyone else involved in the program was ever held accountable. 2015, Hillary Clinton subpoenaed to preserve a homebrewed server. And following the subpoena, her email management company, Platte River Network, they wipe it clean. Employees sent out an email with the subject line stating, quote, Hillary cover-up operation work ticket, archive cleanup, end quote. Not a single person held accountable for that. In 2016, FBI investigating the server, and they allowed multiple people in Hillary Clinton's orbit to have immunity. They allowed electronic communications to be destroyed, phones to be destroyed, laptops to be destroyed. Truly amazing, truly amazing. We all know in 2016, the FBI began its infamous Crossfire Hurricane operation targeting a presidential candidate. They're going to use a dossier paid for Hillary Clinton. They knew it was BS. They knew nothing was verified, yet they went to the FISA court anyway. They lied to the FISA court. They manipulated evidence that they presented to the FISA court. And what happened? Again, nobody ever held accountable. And the investigation, it didn't end when President Trump won the election. You have James Comey, the former FBI director, leaking out classified information to the press. Nothing. You have the United States Postal Service ICOP program, postal inspectors monitoring your social media posts, forwarding posts to the Department of Homeland Security. The Inspector General of the Postal Service said this program was illegal, that it shouldn't have happened. Anyone held accountable? Of course not. Over the last 3 years, you have federal courts on a number of occasions. They've admonished the FBI for illegally accessing the NSA's repository for information on Americans. Has anyone ever been held accountable for that? They keep on doing it. You have multiple intelligence, federal law enforcement agencies. They continue to monitor and collect data on American citizens. The FBI, the CIA, ICE, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. They've amassed millions of records on legal firearm owners, even though Congress forbade them from creating a gun database. That's exactly what they're doing. Why are they amassing all these records if not for a gun database? What about how the Secret Service tried to cover up Hunter Biden's firearm incident? Or how the FBI was used to track down Ashley Biden's diary? What about all the senior level intelligence heads stating Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation in order to manipulate the election? Why haven't we heard any investigations into those people? Then you have the Department of Education, the National School Board Association, Department of Justice, all colluding to target parents, label them as domestic terrorists, going so far as to threat take parents. Why? Because they're concerned about what their children are learning. I did the whole episode last week on the FBI memo targeting traditional Catholics, using the Southern Poverty Law Center in order to target those traditional Catholics, to justify it. Turns out that when you have a real domestic terrorism incident, as we saw in Atlanta over the weekend, where protesters, organized protesters from not only this country, but other countries as well, so you're talking about interstate trafficking that went on, you're talking about organized entities that are involved, they actually commit an act of domestic terrorism. And who is arrested amongst the 23 individuals? Well, it's a Southern Poverty Law Center lawyer. Amazing how that works, right? Don't be surprised when the charges against them get dropped. Mark that now. Let's not forget about this brilliant idea of the Disinformation Governance Board. Nothing more than an attempt for the government to control speech, to be able to declare what's disinformation and misinformation, tying right into the national strategy for countering domestic terrorism, targeting those that express what they deem as anti-government, anti-authority sentiments. We know the CIA collecting data on American citizens. You had two senators, and they're both Democrats, so I give them credit. They're the ones that revealed this information, Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon and Senator Martin Heinrich of New Mexico. And this collection is happening without the oversight of Congress. The CIA is saying that the program is for counterterrorism intelligence-related purposes. However, according to the laws that govern the CIA, which were created by Congress, set forth in executive orders, the CIA is prohibited from collecting information on Americans. Not just Americans, anyone residing within the United States, including permanent residents, legal immigrants, corporations, whatever it may be. Now, there's no oversight of this program. The CIA never went to FISA court to get any type of warrants. But outside of that, we don't know a lot about this program because the CIA will not turn over information to those who have the constitutional duty of oversight. Apparently, these agencies believe they could do whatever they want, consequences be damned. Just the other day, we learned that Department of Homeland Security has another program. And many working on that actual program have complained that it is highly illegal. According to a report from Politico, so this is not like a conservative source out there, the Department of Homeland Security has run a virtually unknown program gathering domestic intelligence for years, and the program is called the Overt Human Intelligence Collection Program. The report states, quote, one unnamed employee, quoted in an April 2021 document, said leadership of INA's Office of Regional Intelligence is shady, runs like a corrupt government. Another document said some employees worried so much about the legality of their activities that they wanted the government, the Department of Homeland Security, to cover legal liability insurance. What does that tell you? Now, this report broke a couple of days ago, and I have not heard any media outlets really focus on it. Then you have all these institutions making a mockery of the First Amendment. Free speech isn't really free. There are so many in power who want to target anyone who deviates from their narratives. Just look at the Twitter files, where you had numerous government departments and agencies pressuring social media companies to censor and silence our God-given right to free speech. They've trampled on the press. The last several administrations have spied on journalists. During COVID, it was the government that determined when, where, and how you could practice your faith, trampling the whole idea of freedom of religion. You had over 1,200 public health officials sign a letter declaring anyone protesting the draconian COVID mandates from the little Mussolini wannabes that they were pushing white supremacist ideology. In fact, members of Congress, they wanted to pass a COVID hate crimes bill where if you dared to suggest that COVID came from the Wuhan laboratory, you could be charged with a hate crime. Think about that. You are not allowed to protest and petition government when they're issuing decree after decree after decree. And if you state the obvious, saying COVID came from the Wuhan laboratory, which is the most likely origin, they wanted to charge you with a hate crime. These people are sick. Don't forget, it was Carol Crawford from the CDC that pressured Twitter to remove what she deemed as, quote, unapproved opinions. And God only knows how many other social media outlets she pressured. Apparently, she thinks she gets the right to determine what opinions are acceptable and which ones are not. We have Dr. Fauci, Lord Fauci, the embodiment of science himself. We have his own emails showing how ruthless his efforts were to target any scientist or medical professional who disagreed with him in an attempt to destroy their credibility. Now, this is all public information. Where's the punishment? Why hasn't anyone been held accountable for this gross abuse of power that we've been witnessing? Where the hell is Congress, who is supposed to be providing oversight? The evidence of rampant abuse within the bureaucracy is widespread. It illustrates that we blindly and obediently trust what our government institutions tell us and what they're doing. Many of our officials act as if we exist to serve them, as opposed to them serving us, as we are nothing more than the peasant class. They've forgotten that we're the ones they work for, and they justify their abuses with their sense of righteousness. They qualify any of their wrongdoing with the sentiment of preserving democracy, right? We're doing it all for democracy, because in their delusional minds, they believe they are the guardians of democracy. Yet they're the ones that will destroy democracy. But it's, again, part of the reason that we are here today is because we have allowed it to happen. We, the people, have allowed it to happen. And the Republican Party, the party that was built on the idea, the principles of limited government and fiscal responsibility, they've deviated far from those principles. Thomas Jefferson once warned, "The time to guard against corruption and tyranny is before they shall have gotten hold of us." Well, where are we today? We need to examine that. And we are. I'm going to show you how, because we moved away from the three principles of old republicanism, that we found ourselves in this position. So I'll be right back after this short break. As someone who worked in emergency management, I routinely sounded the alarm bells on our outdated grid system. Think back to 2003 when a tree branch hit a power line in Ohio, shutting down power to the entire eastern seaboard. Around 100 people died, and this was one of the costliest disasters in American history, with losses totaling over $60 billion. Even the White House sees it. They're saying 2/3 of the grid are at least 25 years old, and they recently announced billions of dollars to update it. But we're talking about the government here. How long do you think that's going to take, if at all? When an incident happens, you have to rely on yourself. Be prepared for yourself and your family. With the Patriot Power Generator, you get a solar generator that doesn't install into your house because it's portable. You can take it with you, even use it inside. But it's powerful enough for your phones, medical devices, and even your fridge. Right now, you can go to 4patriots.com, use code P.A.S. to get 10% off your first purchase on anything in the store, including the Patriot Power Generator. You'll also get their famous guarantee for an entire year after your order, plus free shipping on orders over $97. A portion of every sale is donated to charities who support veterans and their families. Just go to 4patriots.com, use code P.A.S. to get 10% off. That's 4patriots.com, use code P.A.S. to get yours today. Welcome back, everyone. And getting to the three principles of old republicanism, there's a reason that our founding fathers wanted to create a limited government, wanted to create a government that was controlled by the people with institutionalized safeguards, because they wanted to protect the people from themselves, and they wanted to protect the government from the people as well. And these principles, they're essential. Principle number one, governments are unnatural. They're flawed, right? The governments are created by human beings. Human beings are flawed. So any flaws that we have, we're going to take them into whatever we create, including government. It is human beings that are staffing these offices within the government. It is human beings that staff our bureaucracy. It is human beings that have allowed their ideology to infect every aspect of our society, to allow their ideology to guide everything that they do. And it's time that we talk about actually starting to get rid of entire departments and agencies. We're at that point because these government abuses are unsustainable. If they continue in this trend, and we may be over the deep end, who knows? But if we're going to continue down this path, it does end in authoritarianism. And it's not going to matter whether you're a progressive, a Republican, a Democrat, a Libertarian. We are all going to suffer equally under that system. You want equity, there's your equity. Equity of suffering for all of us. Principle number two, liberty is best protected in the small state. It's why we have this system of federalism, where you have the central government, the federal government, and the state governments. They're separate from each other. They have their own respective powers. What's not listed in the Constitution is left up to the states and the people to decide. Unfortunately, what's happened over the years is nobody's learning about how our system actually works. Nobody understands the concept of federalism anymore. And so what's happened is every single issue that exists out there is becoming federalized. Everyone looks to the federal government to solve the problems, not their state and local governments. And as the federal government continues to get more and more power, more and more influence on these issues, they're taking over the duties of the state. And then they blackmail and bribe the states with funding. So if 25% of a state's revenue relies on the federal monies that they're receiving, are they going to push back against the federal apparatus? And the answer is no, not in any significant way, because guess what? No state could survive losing 25% of their budget. They just can't do it. The last principle, the government that governs the best governs the least. We've deviated far from this. We constantly look to the government to solve problems. We constantly look to Congress to pass laws. Well, why is that? Why is that? Why do we think that there's always a government solution? Why don't we understand that in free societies, there's things that we're going to have to take up on our own? There's problems that are going to exist that we're going to have to deal with, that we as individuals are going to have to manage. And sometimes it's not the greatest idea to get the government involved. In fact, a lot of times it's not the greatest idea to get the government involved because we all know how that ends. Yet we continue to turn towards government to solve the problem. And I'm talking about even Republicans are guilty of this. Just a couple of months ago, just think back to the whole Southwest Airlines thing. Southwest Airlines, there were all these delays that Southwest Airlines had. They had to cancel thousands upon thousands of flights. And what were Republicans doing? Well, they're immediately turning their attention towards the Department of Transportation and Secretary Buttigieg, who is one of the most incompetent secretaries in the country's history. And they were saying, you need to do something about this. Well, why? It's the one area where, no, Pete Buttigieg doesn't need to do anything about it. If Southwest Airlines can't get its flights to take off and land on time, if Southwest Airlines cancels its flights, well, sooner or later, people aren't going to fly Southwest Airlines. And sooner or later, Southwest Airlines goes out of business, or they recalibrate and actually provide the services that people expect of them. It's a little thing called capitalism. It actually works pretty good when you allow capitalism to work on its own. But when you constantly have this government manipulation within every aspect of our society, well, it's no wonder that Republicans turn to government to solve a problem. Not for nothing, but I was reading some polls, and these are Gallup polls, and Gallup's a pretty good polling outfit. 54% of Americans, so this, obviously, Republicans make up about 35% of the American electorate, Democrats about 40% because they got the urban areas, and then the rest are non-affiliated, independent voters, libertarian voters, or some other third party. But 54% of the American people believe the federal government is too powerful. 53% say government is doing too many things to solve nation's problems. 2/3 of the respondents said there is too much regulation rather than too little regulation. So the majority of Americans all say that the government is too big, too powerful, the government is doing too many things and it needs to be limited, that there are too many regulations out there, and they want a smaller government. So why aren't we seeing a smaller government? It's simple. It's because while we say those things, we actually encourage big government. We encourage government in all aspects of our lives. We encourage the expansion and the spending. When we sit there, you have two candidates running for office, and I may have said this before, but we have two candidates running for office. You have candidate A, who says, listen, we got a $31.5 trillion budget deficit, debt, national debt. We are spending $400 billion a year on interest on that debt. Social Security, Medicare, going broke. Fast forward 6 years from now, the debt's going to explode as interest rates rise. The debt payment is actually, the interest payment on the debt is going to be more than we spend on the entirety of the Department of Defense. So candidate A says, I am going to do the responsible thing. I am going to bring our fiscal house in order, get the budgeting under control. And we are going to cut every single department and agency and program about 15 to 20% across the board. Doesn't matter what it is. We're cutting it. We're also going to raise taxes to a certain degree. We're going to do this, and it's going to hurt. Everyone's going to feel the pinch. If you collect student loans, well, your student loan Pell Grant is going to be cut by about 15 to 20%. So you're going to have to cover that in the tuition cost. It's going to be every program, whether it's food stamp, no matter what it is. But when we get the fiscal house in order, when we begin to pay down our debt, not balance our budget, I'm talking about actually generating budget surpluses to start paying down our debt, we will be on a path towards fiscal solvency. Then you have candidate B come along, and candidate B says, candidate A, he really hates children. He hates your children. He wants to take money away from education. He doesn't want your children to be educated. He wants your children to be illiterate. He wants your children to be peasants, so that they can't succeed, so that they can't read, so that they can't write. He wants to take money away from veterans who have sacrificed so much in their life, veterans who with very little pay went overseas, putting their lives on the line, going into some of the harshest conditions that we can only imagine. And he wants to cut their benefits. He wants to make you unsafe. He wants to take away your national defense. He wants to cut our defense so that some foreign country can infiltrate and attack the United States. And he obviously hates you because he wants to raise your taxes. He wants you to pay more money to Uncle Sam so that greedy Uncle Sam can do whatever Uncle Sam wants to do. See, I care about your children. And so I don't want to decrease money for education. I actually want to increase the money we spend on education. I care about our veterans. And I want to increase the money that our veterans need because they need the services and the programs. I want to increase money for our national defense. We want to be able to maintain the most sophisticated military in the world. I don't want to raise your taxes. I want to lower your taxes because you're a hard working class American. And so I want to lower your taxes to make the burden easier on you. Who are you going to vote for? Are you going to vote for candidate A that says that they're going to make your life more difficult, even though over the long term candidate A may be right? Or are you going to vote for candidate B that's offering you every little thing you could possibly imagine that promises to improve your life, even though the long term is unrealistic and it's a disaster waiting to happen? And we all know the truth if you're honest with yourself. We all know that most people would support candidate B. See, we don't want to hear truth. It's easy to say, yeah, we should be fiscally responsible. But when you start nitpicking at what programs to begin to cut, the second it's a program or service that you receive from the government, you can say, oh, you can't cut that program. That program's essential. I use it. And that's part of the problem. We reject this idea of truth. But as I always say, truth doesn't depend on whether or not human beings accept it. It doesn't need our acceptance to give it its binding force of validity. It's there. It exists. And if we continue down this pathway, we will destroy ourselves. If we continue to empower government each and every step of the way, we will turn into a tyrannical government if we're not already there, right? COVID opened up a lot of eyes. And this goes for the people on the other side of the aisle, because I give them a lot of hard time too. But guess what? I mean, if 54% of people are responding that they believe the federal government is too powerful, and 53% say the government is doing too many things, and over two-thirds, so two-thirds of them are responding that there's too much regulation as opposed to too little regulation, obviously some of them believe government's too powerful as well. Understand that, your party may be in control now, your party may be able to control the messaging now, but sooner or later the shoe's going to be on the other foot. And do you really want the other political party to become the dominant party and have all this power? Are you going to be satisfied then? No, you're going to bitch and complain like I'm doing. So I'm advocating that we need to restore the principles of limited government. And if Republicans want to win, they would actually start talking about this again. And not only talking about it, they would actually follow through on it. They would actually start eliminating entire agencies that we don't need, that are completely irrelevant. They'd start shutting down programs that have shown time and time again that they're not satisfying the objectives that they set out to, that they have failed in their mission. And so let's eliminate and terminate those programs. When you start cutting funding out of government and start downsizing government, I could guarantee you that many of the problems that we bicker about today, I could guarantee you they'll be gone tomorrow. Not all, but many of them. And this is not to say that I'm an anarchist and I don't want to see government in any capacity and blah, blah, blah. It's not to say that. There is a role for government within our system, but the government can't be the be-all, end-all. The government has extraordinary amounts of power, and over the last 30 to 40 years, we've been granting it more and more power. And how well has it worked out for us? Do you have more problems today or less problems today? Can you name any problem that the government has actually solved? Aren't you tired of being lied to time and time again? I mean, the coronavirus should have opened so many people's eyes. See, what I can't imagine, what still is mind-boggling to me, is how many people will still go out there. They'll defend people like Lord Fauci. They'll defend the idea of masking. They'll defend the idea of vaccine mandates. They'll defend the idea of forced vaccinations. And I'm not talking about the polio, measles, or mumps, or rubella, or anything like that. Okay, it was 15 years. And those vaccinations were actually debated in state legislative houses, passed, and signed into law by a governor. So it followed a constitutional process, and there was enough data. I'm just talking in general. We know that we were lied to on a number of occasions, and yet there's people that still want to defend what took place, what happened. Listen, I always tell you, I'm a conservative, and I always give it to you straight. But if Republicans were doing these things, if Republicans, and I have called them out, when Republicans are in charge of these institutions and they are violating, they are abusing power, I have called them out. That's why I don't want anyone to have this power, regardless of political party, because I have called it out. I called out the last administration with executive orders and spying on journalists. I called out the previous administration for executive orders and spying on journalists, and far more on both of them. I'm someone that criticized the Patriot Act when it was actually developed. I saw where it would go. Now, I'm not expecting Democrats to open their eyes and we're going to return to the 1990s Democrats. Who would have thought the 1990s Democrats were like hardcore conservatives? I mean, who would have thought that that was going to be possible if we had this debate in the 1990s? But I don't expect them to just totally reverse course and start moving away from some of the insanity that we're seeing. What I do expect is Republicans to friggin' smarten up, because they're acting like a bunch of morons out there. What I do expect is Republicans to get back to their roots that led them to a great and strong and powerful political party. What I do expect is not only will they talk about the principles of limited government, not only will they talk about the idea of fiscal responsibility, but they'll actually walk the walk, and they'll do it. If Republicans do that, and they start going into the areas that they've long ignored for decades, provided more support in the local areas to the local chapters of the Republican Party, I will guarantee you they'll start winning elections. But until then, they will continue to lose elections. Too many of us have lost sight as to what built this country, what led it to greatness. Too many have lost sight of what the Founding Fathers were trying to do, the intent of the Founding Fathers. Too many became too trusting of government. And I think it's time that we start to rein in this power, because it's not going to go well if we don't. Now, if you find the contents of this podcast informative, please share it with your friends and on social media. I appreciate any and all 5-star ratings and written reviews on any podcast platform that allows it. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back on Monday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.